We're nearing the end of the battle round now. We're in my favorite phase, the KRUMP phase. I mean the fight phase.
Eligibility to fight is very precise, and we cover this in excruciating detail in our video Cruisin' for a Bruisin', which we highly recommend you take a look at once you're comfortable with the game's basics.
Oi! Quit mucking about! Let's get stuck in, lads!
Okay. Well, let's at least cover eligibility to fight briefly here. A model can be chosen to fight if they satisfy any of the following criteria. 1. They charged successfully. 2. They were themselves charged successfully. Or 3. They are within 1 inch of an enemy model.
This is important for many different reasons, discussed in detail in the aforementioned video. For now, let's keep things simple.
Like readied models in the shooting phase, models that charged have priority. All charged models activate before the rest of eligible fighting models.
As before, if both players have charged models, they activate in alternating order until all charged models have gone, and if one player runs out of charged models, the other player finishes up the remainder of their charged models before the rest of the models attack.
Unlike in the shooting phase, fighting is not optional. You must fight in the fight phase if eligible. You also may not pass or defer a fight to later in the fight phase.
What kind of git is gonna shy away from a proper fight?
Emmanuel, please.
Right. In the fight phase, there's a sequence to remember with each model activation. First, you can pile in up to 3 inches. Second, choose targets. Third, choose melee weapon. Fourth, resolve close combat attacks. And finally, fifth, you can consolidate up to 3 inches. Let's go through each step one by one.
First, the pile-in move. This is a special movement made during the fight phase. The rule is very clear and straightforward. You may move your model up to 3 inches as long as it ends up closer to the nearest enemy model. You can take this literally and move straight towards your foe, or you can be a bit more creative with it.
Second, you choose targets. You can attack any enemy that is within 1 inch of your activated model, as long as they aren't completely obscured by intervening terrain. You check how many attacks your model can make by first checking the attack characteristic of your model, and then check for any war gear or abilities that grant bonus attacks. You then allocate all of these attacks to your enemies before you roll any dice.
This means you cannot allocate a portion of the attacks, roll to see the result, then allocate the rest based on those results. You have to stick with your original designations no matter what happens when you roll the dice.
Third, choose melee weapon. If your model only has one melee weapon, then the decision is easy. Make all of your attacks with this weapon. If the model does not have a melee weapon listed, then you presume that model is just punching its enemy. On page 34 of the core manual, this punch is listed as a close combat weapon with strength user, AP 0, and 1 damage.
If your model has multiple melee weapons, you can divvy up the attacks your model makes between these weapons, unless the specific weapon has a limit on how many attacks it can make.
A key difference in the fight phase compared to the shooting phase is that if you attack with multiple weapons, you do not get to roll separate injury rolls. Whatever attack brings your enemy down to 0 wounds determines the only injury roll made on that enemy during your model's activation, even if there are more attacks from a different melee weapon designated towards it from the same model. Choose your order of operations carefully.
4. Resolve close combat attacks. You now go through and carry out the same attack sequence we covered in our 4th video of the series, rolling your dice as designated in the previous steps of the fight sequence. See what we meant when we said how important having the attack sequence on lock was?
There are only a few modifiers to take into consideration for hit rolls in the fight phase. The -1 suffered for flesh wounds and for broken kill teams are the same in both shooting and the fight phase, but the -1 to hit for intervening terrain is unique to the fight phase.
As stated on page 35 of the core manual, if there is any terrain feature between the attacking and defending models that would prevent you from being able to place the models in base-to-base contact, the attacking model is fighting over intervening terrain and would suffer a -1 to their hit rolls.
An important distinction here is that intervening terrain is not obscuring for the point of injury roll modifiers. If you look closely at the injury roll table on page 32 of the core manual, you'll note that the -1 to the injury roll for obscurement is only relevant in the psychic and in the shooting attack injury rolls. The only injury roll modifier for close combat attacks is the flesh wounds already suffered by the defending model.
And finally, in step 5, you can consolidate up to 3 inches. This movement rule reads identically to the pile-in rule, and for all intents and purposes is the same movement, just made at the end of your model's activation in the fight phase. You simply move an additional 3 inches as long as you end up closer to the nearest enemy model at that moment.
We would love to spend more time talking about pile-in and consolidate movements, as they are nowhere close to as simple as they appear on paper. It turns out that we have already done just that.
Who knew?
We did.
Once you have a grasp of the game, be sure to check out the video we referenced at the top of this tutorial, Cruisin' for a Bruisin', where we dive deep into the nuances of the pile-in and consolidation moves and show some really neat movements you can squeeze out of these seemingly simple rules.
So, once you've gone through the sequence for a single model, the next player does the same with theirs, and so on, just like in the shooting phase, until all the KRUMPing is done.
If you have any questions or need clarifications about anything in the fight phase, please drop a comment below. We are happy to help.
Look for our next video covering the final phase of the battle round, the morale phase. See you then.